Episode 2. After the show, don't forget to visit tell.fish/gear to get our recommendations on gear that will take your angling adventures to the next level and help make you the next Tell Tale Fisherman.
Welcome to the Tell Tale Fisherman Podcast, where avid anglers share the story of their best fishing day ever to inspire yours. Now it's time for another epic adventure. So here's your host, John Woodson.
All right, welcome to the show. Today, I'm very honored to have our second guest ever, who happens to be my compadre, partner in crime in fishing, who I go out with most all the time when I hit the water, and his name is Greg Snyder. Greg, welcome.
Thanks, John. I'm glad to be here and participate in this.
All right, so let's learn a little bit about you. I know a lot, but I think I'm going to learn even more today. Tell us a little bit about what you do for your day job, where you live, and then we'll get into some of your fishing exploits.
Yeah, by day, I manage a sales team for Siemens. We do power generation equipment for North America. So I'm gallivanting around North America and managing an awesome team of people throughout the country.
And you're based here out of Orlando?
Yep, I live here in Orlando, and I'm here at least 3 nights a week.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what got you started in fishing. How did you get hooked?
I think it may sound weird, but I think I was born that way. I have pictures of, now my mom and dad loved the water. I grew up mostly in southern New Jersey, Philadelphia area, and we would go up to Cape Cod for vacation. So I always had a fishing pole in my hand, but the earliest I remember fishing is riding my bike in southern New Jersey down to a local pond and just catching brim, sunfish, and little bass, and I would do that whenever I could get away. So I'd jump on my bike with my rod and dig some worms and go down there and catch fish. And I think that was about second grade. And then from then on, pretty much every year, I'd fish freshwater close to where my houses were. And on vacations, we would go to saltwater, and I would fish pretty much all day long.
So growing up, did you ever live near the coast or saltwater where you had a chance to do that kind of stuff more, or just on vacation?
Morristown, New Jersey, we were a little less than an hour away from Long Beach Island, which had pretty good surf fishing and a little bit of bay fishing. But my dad and some of his buddies used to love surf fishing, and I think I was about the only kid that had the patience to surf fish. And at a right early age, I could keep up with the big guys with my skill set, or actually I was just a lucky guy, I guess.
So how about through college and the years following? What type of fishing did you do then, and what opportunities did you get to go fishing?
College, not a lot. I went to a pretty hard school and double majored, so during the school year, I did not fish, I think, at all. In the summers, I did a little bit, but I was working, for college money. So I would say in the late 70s, when I was in college, is probably the time I fished least in my life. But then my first job, I moved down to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I ultimately met my wife then, or now as well. And her mom and dad just so happened to live on a saltwater bayou. And that was like the best place. Now, I live in a really cool place here to fish in Florida, but it does not compare to Louisiana.
And what'd you do and fish for there in Louisiana?
The house was literally right on a bayou, and it had a couple lights over the bayou. And so at night, the redfish and trout would crush the little minnows. They called cacao minnows, and shrimp that would be drifting by in the tide. It was a saltwater bayou. So at night, we would fish for trout and redfish. And they actually had a dog that somehow sensed when the fish were biting. So he'd run to the front door, look up above the door, and you think you needed to go out and pee or something, and turns out you open the door, underneath the light, the fish were popping. So the rule was, if he told you the fish were popping, he got to eat the first one.
I wish I had a dog like that. Mine are pretty worthless. So tell us about what type of fishing you do these days.
Pretty much here, I live on a golf course, so I have a little pond behind my house that I go out maybe once a month or so with either a fly rod or light spin casting, and catch bass. But my real passion is saltwater. And I am torn between running near shore, offshore to the reefs, or out to the Gulf Stream on a 26-foot sailfish, or fishing tight to the beach for snook and redfish in that boat. Or I think my favorite really is actually kayaking and wade fishing, mostly in the Banana River.
Yes, and we are blessed here in our area to have all of these opportunities pretty close by. And in full disclosure, that 26-foot sailfish Greg was talking about, he and I actually co-own and take out and try and splash each other every chance we get when we're out on the water. Okay, so we have a pretty good sense for what it is you fish for on a regular basis these days, but tell us what it was, just what the species was that you were after on the most epic day that you can remember.
Actually, I was in Texas fishing with a friend of mine over there, and we decided to go out and look for some skinny water redfish.
All right, when we get back, Greg is going to tell us about his epic skinny water redfish adventure. Stay tuned. Live bait is often the difference between an epic day and a slow day of fishing. On my last vacation, we were fishing for snook on the beach. The fish were there, but the bait was not. So I ended up driving my boat a mile away to catch bait and then transported them back to the spot on the beach with a 5-gallon bucket. However, in the hot Florida sun, that plan did not work out so well. But now I have found a much better portable option for keeping bait alive on the boat and on shore. Visit tell.fish/gear to check it out. That's tell.fish/gear. Okay, we are back with our guest, Greg Snyder, and continuing on with his epic redfish adventure in skinny water. Greg, where were you fishing on that day?
In the Laguna Madre, which is by Port Mansfield in Texas. That's the southernmost part of Texas on the Gulf. Laguna Madre is very much like Mosquito Lagoon, Indian River, Banana River, but it's even shallower, but it's gin clear. So we were out there with fly rods looking for redfish and trout.
And is that a tidal area, or how much is the tide affect the fishing there?
Yeah, it's got a little more tide than we do in Central Florida, at least in the inlet areas. It probably has like a 2-foot tide, 3-foot tide, I think. But the key is that there's this vast flats, and we actually fish in a boat that's unique. It almost looks like an airboat with a big jack plate, and you actually sit up on a platform on top of the boat. And so you can visually spot tailing redfish and schooling trout.
So you were out fishing with a guide this day, correct?
I was. I like to use guides in areas that I don't know well, just so it's just so much more productive. They know the water, they know what to fish with, and they know the spots. And especially if you're only fishing one day and you got a buddy, and I had a recommendation for a guide with this from this friend, and it worked out pretty good.
So tell me about how you start off in this area. So you go to a boat launch, I take it, and do you have to go a long way? Are you screaming across the skinny flats or go across deep water? What's the area like?
Yeah, he launched the boat right there in Laguna Madre, and we ran, I would say, half an hour or so looking for tailing redfish. And the water we're running through is at most knee deep. So it is kind of weird flying across the water at 35, 40 miles an hour, super skinny water. And you see, shorebirds wading just barely up to their knees. So you really definitely have to know where you're going, because there's certainly some high and dry spots. We went out, and I guess we went right out early in the morning when you usually do for redfish, looking for tailing redfish. And it was in June, so it was not super, super hot in the daytime. And the bite he thought would be early in the morning. But we spent the first 2 or 3 hours push-poling and wading, and saw 1 or 2 redfish, but didn't catch anything at all.
Well, I'm taking it that you ultimately did find some redfish on this day, correct?
Yeah, we were just cutting across a flat, and then we came to a deep channel. And there was this water pouring through into this channel, so we decided to stop there and fish the edges, and I think we caught a trout or 2. And I noticed just maybe 50 yards away, 100 yards away, as I was kind of wading, and I'd like to wade. It's kind of like hunting with a fly rod in your hand. that there were these big potholes, and that the water was just rushing off of these flats into these potholes. And I figured, if I were a lazy redfish, where would I hang out? I'd hang out where the water was coming off this vast flat, and the flat that had emptied into this pothole had to be 2, 3, 4 miles long. You could not see any other deep water. You couldn't see any channels. It was just like massive flat dumping into these potholes right before it got into the deep channels heading out to the Gulf.
And so what'd you find there in that epic pothole?
The funny story is the guy didn't really think that was a good spot. He goes, well, the fish are usually on the edge here right by the deep water. I said, well, yeah. So he stood there with my buddy, and they were casting this one area. So I walked up to the edge of the pothole and threw what's called a fly spoon. It's a little spoon about the size of a quarter, or maybe a little smaller than that, and it's shiny, and it was gold colored, which we all know redfish likes gold. So I threw it up on the flat and just drug it into this pothole. And first cast, I caught a redfish, about 20, 21 inches.
And were you seeing fish in this hole, or just flat water?
It was flat water, and although the water was pretty clear, it was rushing so much that it had a little bit of turbidity. But the water, I didn't go wading into it. I'm guessing the water in the potholes was somewhere around 4 or 5 foot deep. So it was it went from less than probably a foot or two max into 5 or 6 foot of water. And that's where those redfish were just stacked up thick.
And how big around was this pothole you were fishing in?
I would say there was actually 3 potholes. There was one about 20 yards across, and the one they were really stacked up was at most 30, 35 yards across.
Okay, so I'm taking it you have a captive audience here in terms of fish. So we've caught one. What happens after this? Well,
between a friend of mine and myself, we caught 77 others, all on a fly rod, an 8-weight fly rod, all on this spoon fly, just one cast after another. Or every now and then you'd hook a trout, but the vast majority are redfish, and they were all in the 21 to 24 inch slot size. And if you made 2 casts and didn't hook a fish, you would just move a little further down the pothole. And we did this for 2 hours, caught those fish. Unfortunately, we were shooting for 100. We released all of them, but I had a flight to catch back to Orlando, so we really hated to leave fish, but we really didn't have a choice.
So how many fish do you think were in that pothole, if you had to guess?
There had to be hundreds, just because we caught, close to 100 ourselves. Now, they may have all been stacked up, and we may have caught the vast majority of them because they were all, exactly where they were facing. They're facing the rushing water off of the flat. So we may have caught most of them, but I can't imagine we caught a fish more than once. But, redfish aren't the smartest fish sometimes, so maybe we caught one more than once. But I think there had to have been 200-300 fish in those big potholes.
Man, so just to recap, in 2 hours, you say you caught 78 total fish?
78 redfish, all on a fly rod.
Wow. So have you come anywhere close to that in terms of your other red fishing and just in sheer numbers in any other adventure?
Once when I went down to Louisiana to buy Le Fouche, early morning I went out, and actually with a fly rod as well. I caught 50 one morning, and I had the whole bottom of the bateau. And in Louisiana back there in the late 70s, early 80s, your limit was 50. So I actually counted exactly 50 redfish that I'd caught on a fly rod, and I took them back to the office and fed a whole bunch of happy people redfish fillets.
I bet. When did it dawn on you that this was more than just an average day of fishing? When did that light bulb kind of come on and say, hey, I think I'm onto something special here?
I think when I caught 10 redfish on a fly on 10 casts in a row, or that's pretty unusual to catch 10 fish on 10 casts on a fly rod especially. So I knew that was pretty epic. I would have been happy with that, but then it kept going and going and going. It was even better though. The guide really didn't think that was a good spot. So that added a little icing to the cake that I kind of discovered the spot in the guide's backyard.
I'm thinking he thought it was a pretty good spot after that, huh?
I bet he went there the next day if the tide was ripping. Now, one thing to his credit, whether it was the moon or the cycle of the tide was ripping much more than it normally did, because he fished this area all the time. and he was shocked that there were that many redfish stacked up there. I guess the proximity to the deep water, the tide had been up high, they had gone into these potholes, and then a drop like a rock. It was. He said that the water was flowing out as fast as he'd ever seen it. So I think maybe we just got really, really fortunate with it. Just a ripping tide and a bunch of hungry redfish that really liked this little gold spoon we had.
So do you think that was the key to this thing, that you just happened to catch the absolute perfect tide in the perfect place, or was there something else going on that made this day stand out above all the others?
Well, the fact that the guy I was fishing with had only caught like 3 redfish, the most he'd ever caught in one day, and so of the 78, he probably had maybe a third of them or a quarter of them. So that was epic for him. So when your buddy catches a bunch of fish too on a fly rod again, the guide was just like going crazy. He had never caught maybe 30 in the boat in his whole life of guiding. So I guess when you break all the records, your buddy has fun, you have fun. You do it in a couple hours. You participated in finding the fish. We released them all, which is kind of neat too. And then I jumped on a plane smelling very fishy. And people at Southwest Airlines, I'm sure, enjoyed that immensely. Came back with just a fabulous fishing story that was just, one of those epic days.
Yeah, no doubt. So if you had to summarize it, would you just say this was the right place, right time, just dumb luck? I mean, what was it that really made this whole thing happen?
I think it was the tide. I think this was the water rushing off the flats into the deep pools early in the summer when the fish were actively feeding. So I think it was the right place at the right time. I really don't think that was... Now, we had the right fly. They liked this little spoon, so we obviously, by dumb luck, matched some kind of hatch that was happening with some probably little crabs were coming off the flat. But I think if we'd had live shrimp or something else, we would have probably caught just as many. Been a lot more of a pain. But when you can catch that many fish on artificial, and I think the whole time I had one break off, so we caught all that on like 2 of these little spoon flies.
Wow, well, that's pretty amazing, and I think we have a new record we have to shoot for here. But 78, especially on a fly, that's pretty remarkable. All right, Greg, thanks so much for sharing that with me. You make me want to go grab the kayaks and head out fishing now.
Thanks, John.
Do you know someone who would be a great guest on the Tell Tale Fisherman? If so, go to tell.fish/guest and recommend them for the show. We won't bug them. We'll just give them the chance to share the story of their lifetime and become a fishing legend. Visit tell.fish/guest.
This has been the Tell Tale Fisherman Podcast. Thanks for sharing another great tale with us. Be sure to check out the show notes page for more info on today's show and the gear we talked about. Keep those lines tight, and we'll catch you next time right here on the Tell Tale Fisherman Podcast.